I assume that's a recording.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Adelaide Microsoft IT Pro Community Meetup for April. It's the first one for the year that we're actually sort of hosting. So we had the Azure Hybrid IT Ops Talk event in February that we highlighted. So that Discord server is still actually going on, and they're reporting on things like Ignite and future virtual events that are coming up. Obviously, last month was Ignite itself, so that's why we're kicking off the year from April. Apologies from Adam, you can't make it. I believe Brett's got some technical difficulties with no power at his place, so we'll kick on without them. So that person in. All right. So yeah, last month was the spring version of Ignite. That's spring in the US. So the March event. Some big announcements. I'm not going to cover all of them, but first one being Microsoft Viva. So there's 4, I guess, apps that make up this new employee experience platform. So it's all about being connected and getting insights on your colleagues and your employees and your leaders. So the first one of those would be the Insights. So this is designed for individuals, your managers and your leaders to get some personalized and actionable insights on the business. So it's through in the animation here. Also got mobile phone compatibility as well, so you can get those insights on the go. They're bringing in the workplace analytics and the My Analytics components into the same Viva Insights later on in the year. Next, we've got the Viva Topics. So this is very similar to how there's the SharePoint Syntex or Cortex, as well as the Yammer Topics. So it common terms or uncommon terms and gives you more information on those topics. So that is actually a paid add-on. So unlike the other Viva options, this one it does tap into the Microsoft AI services. So there is a, well, I forget how much it was, but it is an add-on per month as well. Now the next one, Learning. This is one I'm very interested in and kind of excited. So it's a hub within Microsoft Teams. So all these Viva apps will be available inside Teams itself. This is going to be kind of a combination of different learning platforms. So Microsoft's partnered up with, say, Pluralsight, EDX, Coursera, and all that, as well as there's LinkedIn Learning and Microsoft Learn. So this provides knowledge and expertise across many different platforms. And best part is you can assign them to your team members. So you can give them deadlines, and it can also be used for, say, an onboarding process. So pretty nifty. And lastly, there's the Viva Connections. So this is very much like the SharePoint homepage. So they've surfaced that up into Teams itself. So you've got that company branding, your news aggregation, and other kind of notifications and even Yammer conversations on the go. So this one is also generally available now, along with Insights. The only differences with Connections is you need to download look at the app contents, and then if you have the skills, you can modify it and redeploy the app package with some extra customizations. I believe it's an XML file inside. So after that, there's a PowerShell script you run, and it generates the app package that you upload into Teams Admin Center, and then you can publish it out to everyone in the business, and it'll show up in Teams. So yeah, some new toys coming. One of the other big sort of things they showed off was Microsoft Mesh. So this is a mixed reality platform with digital representations of all your remote participants. So you can see here there's a lady in a blue sweater and a guy in a red shirt. So they're joining this mixed reality session from afar, and they can all see the same content from their respective places, but it looks like they're all in the same room. I'm sure there's going to be bigger and better things coming out of this, but it's pretty cool. And also there's the book of news. So like I said, there's a lot of stuff that happens during Ignite. So it's across modern workplace, security, Power Platform, and etc. So I'll copy these links into the meeting chat, and we'll put them on the meetup comments afterwards. So Microsoft Teams, I'm just going to go through some of the highlights of what was announced. So presenter mode is coming soon, TM. So this will then allow us to have the presenter be superimposed over your PowerPoint slides. So I believe it's part of the PowerPoint Live service as well. So some creative and improved production valued presentations, and this would also apply to your live events as well. Speaking of live events, webinars are coming. So just like creating a meeting or a live event, we're going to get an extra option for webinars, and this will actually provide a attendee registration form, and you get a report afterwards. But when an attendee fills it out, they'll get an email confirmation, and it'd be just like a live event, but it's more interactive. So it's kind of the mid ground between a meeting and a live event. So this will allow up to about 1,000 people in an interactive session, and this scales up to about 10,000 people. It then becomes a broadcast only session, so like a live event. And I believe for the remainder of this year during these times, they're allowing these meetings or these webinars to scale up to 20,000 people at a time. So thirdly, I'd like to just showcase Teams Connect. So this is another, one of those things where you're going to have to manage and govern well at the start. So like having private channels, we get a third option of a share channel. So this is sharing a channel from within the business or externally. So this adds that channel or team into your list of teams in the one place. So you don't have to swap between guest account tenants and the Teams app and all that. But and I needed to see a little bit more about how it all works in the background. But I know from private channels, those created a separate private SharePoint site in the background. So we'll see what happens with the share channel. It might just be a bunch of guest users. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but it's in private preview now, and they look to be rolling out later this year. So we'll have probably another look at this throughout the year when there's more announced on it. The Power Platform space, just quickly, the Power Automate application for desktop. So this gives us robotic process automation within the desktop app. And there's also a browser extension for this. So check out the documentation. There are some flows that require different licensing. So it could be per user, per app licensing. So I'm not too savvy on what needs what, but the documentation will have it all and also show you what you can actually do from your desktop versus in the cloud. PowerFX is a low-code language. So this is essentially what's used in Power Apps when you're creating a Canvas app. So it's similar to the Excel formulas you'd use. And what they're doing is they're moving this out of Power Apps and into Power Virtual Agents, Dataverse, and model-driven apps. So within Power Apps, so it's creating a spectrum of development from having little to no code experience to more professional / experienced developers. So you can use what's out of the box here, or you can actually use your programming language of choice to develop something a bit more complex. Certification space, so security, compliance, and identity. There are a bunch of role-based certificates now. So going from fundamentals onto SecOps analyst, identity access, and information protection administration. So if you did register for Ignite and you did complete the Cloud Skills Challenge, you would have been gifted a free exam of choice. So I believe these 4 were part of that list of free exams. So after that, we've got Dynamics 365. So they're splitting out the fundamentals exams into CRM and ERP. So they'll be retiring the old fundamentals exam. And lastly, we've got Windows Virtual Desktop. So there's a specialty certification for this one now. It's currently in beta. So I'll share a link to the blog, tech community blog. It's the first 300 registrations get a discount, so whether that's still going or not. But the T's and C's were you have to take it by the end of this month. And just other learning resources. So I believe the Pluralsight Azure content is still free. They're doing the free April thing again this year. So that's all of the Pluralsight courses and content for free for the remainder of the month. If you missed the Cloud Skills Challenge for Ignite, there's still a chance to get in on the developer one. So that's a 30 days to learn it challenge. As the name suggests, you get 30 days to complete a learning path. And after that, you'll get a 50% off voucher for one of the exam of choice, so the learning path respective exam. Still virtual training days, so if you tune in on these, some of the fundamental ones will give you a free exam for the fundamentals, but these are running around the world in different time zones, so there's other stuff within Azure Data Platforms and Dynamics and Power Platform, not necessarily fundamental level, but they're going to cover a whole lot of things there if you can tune into those. So with all these certifications, they did have expiry dates of 2 years from when you attain them. So what they're doing now is you can do an online assessment from anywhere from 6 months out from the expiry date. So you can go on to, I believe it's Microsoft Learn, to take this assessment, and if you do pass, then your certification gets renewed for another period, possibly a year. If you do fail, I believe you wait a day to be able to retake it, and then I think it's similar to resetting a exam where you have to wait maybe a week before you reattempt it. If you do let the expiry lapse, then you do have to reset the actual exam again. So just be wary of that. You should get email notifications when the assessments become available for you to take. And they've updated the cert poster with the extra security roles as well. SharePoint turned 20 last month. So they had a virtual event during the European SharePoint Summit. It's where Jeff Teeper, the father of SharePoint, was showered with love, I guess. So SharePoint's come a long way from the site server and now into SharePoint Online with all the online, all the AI features slapped onto it now. So a little bit of history there. So we haven't got anything planned just yet for next month. So if anyone's got something they want to present, or if they want to recommend someone to showcase something, let us know. So email the meetup group, or you can hit up either Brett, Adam, or myself, and we can organize something. But for now, I'm going to hand over to our guest, Pete Calvert from Microsoft, and he'll be discussing privilege access recommendations.
Thanks, Andrew, and hi, everyone. Let me get a screen up. Okay. And can I just get a thumbs up if people can actually see what's actually up on the screen? Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, and I think maybe most of you do, my name's Pete Calvert. I used to actually run this group back when it first started, and before Adam and Brett and then Andrew took over. So it's good to see that it's still going. And there's, from a community perspective, I think it's fantastic that many of us who are in otherwise can be in very lonely jobs can have that community of people who have got like needs. Now, one of the things that often hits us is privileged access and how to secure privileged access, and making sure that only those who should have access have access. So what I'll first do is a quick agenda of what we'll cover. First, what is privileged access, at least as far as Microsoft is concerned, what is privileged access? We'll cover a little bit of the security story around securing privileged access, and then look at two of the main models that are part and parcel of Microsoft's approach to securing privileged access. The first of these is the AD tier model, which is based on Active Directory, 20-year-old technology, and the tier model itself is about 10 years old now. So very mature, and even though, as we will see, the documentation makes it sound like it's no longer the be-all and end-all, it is still the recommended approach, recommended model for your on-prem workloads. We'll also look at the enterprise access model, which has superseded to a large extent the Active Directory tier model. And we will cover, yes, other options apart from MFA around security for privileged access. Finally, a summary of the changes. Now, these changes actually occurred late last year, where there was some new advice and new things that came up on the Microsoft Docs site, but we will cover those. But first up, can I just get people to use the raise hands feature just to show me how many of you are responsible for looking after privileged access in your environment? How many of you are either domain admins or global admins or in the security side of things? It looks like we've got a fair number of hands going up. Thank you very much, everyone. You can pop them down now. That's good. Good number of hands there. So if I say that privileged access includes IT administrators with control of large portions of the enterprise estate, and also other users who've got access to business critical assets, that's what we gather, that's what we classify as privileged access. It's not just in terms of the identity systems and who can do what in the systems, but also the financial information, the HR information, corporate IP and sensitive information, board papers, all that sort of stuff is also considered to be privileged data or critical assets that you need privileged access to be able to get to. The model that we've got here on the screen at the moment is just showing that in order to get access to these systems, these business critical systems, the users will go through a device, a workstation, some sort of endpoint. They will use an account. They may go through multiple intermediaries, whether it's a VPN, whether it's a Bastion host, whether it's a jump server or something else. And then finally, they will hit an interface in order to get to these assets. However, attackers would also want to get hold of these assets. So from the security perspective, when we talk about securing these important assets, our identity systems and the business critical assets, what we are trying to do is to sort of slow the attackers down and disrupt their return on investment. We want to make it as expensive and as hard as possible for them at the minimum cost to us. There is absolutely no point in putting into place a security system that's worth, $1 million if the value of the assets that you're protecting is only 100,000 or something of that sort of magnitude. There's no such thing as a 100% secure system. And from a security perspective, the three things that we look at are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If the system's not available, then security is failing. So from a productivity perspective, for people to actually do their work, for the business to actually function, things have to be available. If they are available, there are ways for attackers to find weak spots and ways around the system to be able to get in. So this is our goal, is that to secure privileged access, what's the minimum cost for us that increases the attacker's cost to the highest. So I talked about the typical path of user access from the device, workstation, mobile phone, tablet, whatever it happens to be, using their account through an intermediary to an interface. The lowest level that the users are operating at, typically the attackers have got the easiest way in. So if they can phish the account, if they can get onto an unlocked workstation, for example, if they can sniff unencrypted traffic going across the wire and do a replay or a man-in-the-middle attack, or if the app itself, the workload itself, where the critical information is being stored hasn't been secured or has security vulnerabilities that can be leveraged, then the attacker will just go for there. We've seen the acceleration, the number of script kiddies and others who've just got easy to use, simple, free or cheap tools to hack systems and to get access to things that they really shouldn't have access to. What we want to do though is we want to start going up the scale and thinking about in terms of how do we protect the systems. Now, originally we had privileged access and user level access. What we've done is we've redefined the model a bit. Now, Chris Jackson, the App Compat guy, who unfortunately passed away last year, bicycle accident, he initially proposed a 5-layer model in terms of levels of security. That was a bit too complex for people to actually implement, so we've scaled that back down to 3 layers of security, and the 3 layers of security are privileged access, which is the highest level of access and the area that we're going to be focusing on. Enterprise security, which is the baseline security for any organization. This is where we expect everybody who doesn't otherwise have particular needs to be operating at. And then there is a specialized security layer. The specialized security layer is for those people who, from a productivity perspective, we don't want to put a big hit on how they actually do their work, but we still want to make sure that we're recognizing that the workloads that they're involved in, the things that they are doing might require a little bit extra security, putting in a few extra barriers above and beyond what enterprise security might be having. Let me give you an example. In the enterprise security layer, we might allow people to bring your own device. We might be allowing people to log on from their own devices. We might be allowing, excuse me, people to have local administrator access on their devices. It's the sort of rank and file way that the business operates. When we get to specialized security, the main differences that we would tend to recommend in differentiating enterprise security from specialized security is that they are otherwise the same as the enterprise security accounts, but they do not have local admin access, that the applications that are installed on their device are corporate approved applications, so they've been whitelisted, and if they want to have access to a new application, they essentially have to get approval for that application to go through the normal business approval process, get added to a service catalog and then added to their machine. They wouldn't be using BYOD, they have to use a corporate provided machine. And any security incidents or other things that are occurring with their account get elevated in terms of the security operations center. So if there is ever incidents that are occurring that the security team are responding to, anyone in the specialized security account, or from a specialized security device, or is accessing a specialized security interface for a specialized security classified application, they would jump the queue. They would go to the front of the queue in terms of the normal user accounts that are being talked about. This makes it a lot harder for attackers to be able to get in. We find that most attackers will actually leverage the local admin access and get in that way, or use websites or accounts or other things that can break out of the sandbox or security model that we would otherwise be running things in. Privileged access, when we start talking about privileged access, we're really talking about admin accounts. We're talking about accounts that are special purpose. They are used for privileged access only. For people that are using privileged access, they will have 2 accounts. Now, you might remember back in the day, many years ago, there was advice that admins would have 2 accounts. They would log on using their normal account, and if they needed to do privileged work, they'd log off and then they'd log on using their privileged account. We've sort of cycled back to that model where we really, if these are true privileged workloads that we're trying to protect, then it's a separate account, and only that separate account that gets used for accessing that. So when the attackers normally attack, they have a number of options to compromise this privileged access. The attack surface is quite wide, so they can attack at the user level, they can attack it at the privileged access level, they can attack the identity systems, they can attack the approval and elevation authorization processes. So in saying, please give this person access to something else. So what we try and do is we actually form a channel around the privileged access. We put walls around it to try and protect that. Now, there are still a couple of attack vectors, but we've dramatically reduced the attack surface for attackers. And what this requires is an end-to-end approach, a mindset that's end-to-end as far as security is concerned. We can't just look at securing the endpoint. We can't just look at securing the identity system. We can't just look at securing the application load that they're working on. We really have to think about it in terms of where along that entire path might an attacker try and get in. So in order to do this, the general rules are, the general initiatives that we look at, one is zero trust. So we recently saw this come to light with the SolarWinds supply chain issue, where we were trusting the systems that we use to build the servers and the other things that we've got. That was a real wake up. That was a reminder that we need to go back and actually have a look at the sources that we're actually pulling things from. We also need to look at clean keyboards. So in a zero trust environment for privileged sessions, we're actually using privileged access workstations. We're using workstations that are only ever logged onto using privileged accounts and never able to be logged on using user level accounts. For the same reason, those privileged accounts are never able to log on to the user level devices. It's a clean keyboard. The only thing that it's capturing is the stuff that should be captured. We also want to make sure that we have a monitoring of the identity systems and protecting the identity systems. The identity systems is one of those paths that the attackers will try and use to get into that secure channel. Some of the ways that we will do this, protecting the identity systems in terms of on-prem, in terms of Active Directory, is through the use of group policies, through the use of accounts being stored in particular OUs, in terms of being able to limit who's got the ability to reset particular passwords. For the cloud world, for in Azure, some of the ways that we protect the identity systems is by using conditional access, using multi-factor authentication, using privileged identity management, in other words, elevation of accounts when required, but otherwise there's no standing access being given to some of these roles. We want to mitigate lateral transversal. Lateral transversal is where somebody has logged on using an account on one system and then is using the same account on other systems. Typically, you'll see this with the help desk is using an admin account to get on, and that same admin password is being used on other systems. Or for servers, the same local admin password is being used on a server that is running file servers, and is also, sorry, turn my phone onto silent. Is running just a file server or a web server or something else like that, and the same admin password is being used on a PKI server, or heaven forbid is also the same password being used for your domain admin, which is your admin password for your domain controllers. That's where you've got that lateral traversal of using an account in a lower privileged system or a less secure system, and then being able to leverage those credentials in a higher privileged system. We can use LAPS, a local administrator password system, to be able to make individual passwords for the admin account for each system. But we do the same thing in the models that we're using here, where for each of the workloads that people are logging onto, we want to make sure that the accounts, particularly the privileged accounts that are being used, and the passwords that are being used for those accounts are particular to those workloads. So people can't leverage an account on one workload that might be exposed and then pick that up and use that elsewhere. You'll get the same advice online by saying use different passwords. Don't use the same password for all the different sites that you've signed up for, so that if one gets compromised and your password gets leaked, the attackers can't use your email and account and password to log on to other sites. Finally, and this is something that's new for the newer model, the enterprise access model as opposed to the tier model, rapid threat response. What we're really aiming for here is to say that we need to have a system in place where when something goes wrong, you know how you are going to respond and how quickly you can respond. When things do go wrong, the brain sort of shuts down to a large extent and you go into a fight or flight situation. The panic sets in, you're sort of wondering what to do. This is why organizations have BCP and DR plans, because when things go wrong, we need a process that we've tested, that we know works. Do the same thing for security incidents. If there is a security incident on a particular area, how are you going to react? How are you going to operate? One of the key things that recommendations in the models is that the generic accounts, the built-in accounts like domain admins for your on-prem Active Directory, and your global administrator account for Azure, as well as a number of other high privileged accounts, the Intune administrator, for example, if you're using Intune, those accounts get used in emergency situations only. Those accounts are what we call break glass accounts. They get used to set up the environment, they get used to create other admin accounts, but then they get put in a safe. And if they ever get used, their password gets changed and stored again in the safe. Those things do not have any policies and security policies applied to them. Once again, they should never be used except in emergency situations. That way, you've got a rapid threat response that says, in this particular situation, if we suddenly find there's a denial of service attack happening and the policies are being corrupted to prevent us, our normal privileged access to be able to do things, we can go and get the break glass account. We can get the domain that we can drive straight through. You'll have the same thing at the network layer with network devices. If you talk to your networking team, if they don't have a separate back channel or a port on each of the network devices that are using, which is not subject to all the other controls, then that might be something they want to consider as well. That's a recommendation for handling denial of service attacks where the networks are basically flooded and are stopping the admins getting in to actually change the configs or fix problems on the networking devices. This is a control channel, if you like, that's only being used, a separate network that they can use to get in to bypass all of that, you know, extra denial of service that is happening in order to rectify the problems. Make sure that you've got a fix, make sure that you've got a backdoor, you know what that backdoor is, that process is, and it's controlled and monitored heavily. All right. This is the tier model. Can I get just a show of hands, please, for those who are familiar with the tier model or have heard of the tier model before? Got a few hands coming up. That's good. All right. For those of you who aren't familiar with the tier model has been around for, thanks, and you guys can put your hands down now. Fantastic. The tier model has been around for about 10 years. It is based on 3 tiers. The tiers are, tier 0 is for enterprise-wide identity. So by definition, Active Directory is tier 0. PKI, Azure AD Connect, and anything else that is responsible for looking after those servers would also be put into tier 0 as well. You want to limit that to as small a number of services as possible. Tier 1 is your server admins. These are SCCM, System Center Operations Manager, Exchange, your HR system, SAP, your finance system, any other big business systems, your web servers, your file servers, other things like these are all sit in tier 1. Now, each of the workloads in tier 1 is managed separately, but by and large, tier 1 is a lower level of security required, still need to be secure, but a lower level of security required than tier 0. Tier 2 is your workstations, it's your normal user access. And in fact, for many organizations, they don't actually get to implementing tier 2. These are just stuff that's outside the tier model, things that we're not particularly worried about putting extra security controls on. But we call it tier 2 because this is the tier model. Now, the fundamentals of the tier model are that anything at a higher tier cannot log on to or access administratively anything at a lower tier, nor can anything at a lower tier log on to or administratively access anything at a higher tier. And there is another red arrow going from tier 1 to tier 0 to say blocking access. I just didn't want to make it too busy. Access is blocked. The tier model is based on isolation. We are isolating these tiers from each other. The primary reason for doing this is to prevent elevation attacks. The primary reason is to make sure that if anybody manages to lift any credentials whatsoever from anything that is operating in tier 2, they cannot use those credentials to log on to or administratively access anything in tier 1 or tier 0. Same with tier 1. Any credentials in tier 1 that are used to access things in tier 1, if they are exposed by somebody else using that system in tier 1, those credentials cannot be used to access administratively or log onto anything that is operating in tier 0, nor should those credentials be allowed to log on to or be cached in anything in tier 2. Right? It's to stop that elevation of privilege. But then the cloud came into the picture. The cloud broke the model as far as isolation is concerned. On-prem, yes, we could put isolation boundaries and security boundaries around these. We could put network controls in. We could use OUs and group policy to control things inside Active Directory. We don't get to do that in the cloud. So we've got an admin path in the cloud, and then we've got people, users needing to access things in the cloud, accessing services for productivity reasons. This is the whole reason why things have shifted to the cloud. All right. So we can't use the tier model to shift to the cloud. Now Microsoft's focus has moved to focusing on cloud. So when we start talking about legacy, we're talking about on-prem systems. Now for many organizations, that's not a nice thing to hear, and we'll push back on it, and I perfectly understand that. Legacy is a loaded term, and if it's on-prem and it's important to your business, it's still important to your business, even if Microsoft classifies it as legacy and is encouraging you to shift it to Azure. Right? I understand that's the world that we live in. So in order to cater for this move to the cloud, we tried to rejig the way that the tier model worked, and nothing really fitted. So we broke things down and we started to develop a new model for privileged access, and we put this in the enterprise access model. Now the enterprise access model does include the tier model. It supersedes the tier model as an overall concept and umbrella, but if you're needing to implement things at the on-prem level, then you can still drive down to putting in the tier model approach for your on-prem workloads. It just doesn't work in terms of cloud or hybrid workloads or things that are connected all over the place. So instead, we're referring to things, instead of tiers, we're referring to things in terms of planes. The first plane is the data or workload plane. So for your data, for your applications, your websites, we'll pop them in a plane, and there are multiple planes, one for each data area. So SQL, Azure SQL, for example, might be a data plane, or a workload plane, a web app, or an application that's sitting in the cloud. It could even be VMs that are sitting in the cloud. They would be operating inside a workload plane. We then add in control and management planes. Now the management plane is typically what we would be using to manage the workloads, as also managing all the infrastructure and the other components around the system. So think about it in terms of, SCCM or SCOM or your other SIEMs, security information and event management tools, Exchange, all those sorts of workloads that are across wide range across the organization. They would typically be classified in the management plane, and we're really talking about having accounts here that are managing or looking after on their day-to-day work the stuff that is sitting in the data and workload planes. Then we have the control plane. The control plane is where your identity systems live. So Azure Active Directory is sitting in the control plane. And when we start talking about the control plane, we're really thinking about it in terms of the identities who provide access to others, or administration of identities rather than the underlying workloads that the business is relying on. The users come in and access the workloads via an interface. We're still considering the user accounts, the devices that they're using, the intermediaries that they're going through, whether they're using virtual desktop, whether they're going via a web page, something else like that. We have app access, so APIs, both coming in externally from other systems, and internal app access, internal APIs as systems are talking to other systems and exchanging information. And then we think about privileged access and how privileged access is coming into and accessing those systems. So where are the accounts living, and what are those accounts doing, and what sort of security controls can we wrap around them to make sure that from a control plane and a management plane aspect that we are securing things. The rules, what we put in place, zero trust. We talked about zero trust. We're still employing zero trust on all this level of access. We want to have pervasive security and policy enforcement. So across the entire channel, we're thinking about it in terms of the accounts the devices, the intermediaries, and the interfaces, what methods are being used. And we want to mitigate any unauthorized privileged escalation. So things that are happening inside the data workload plane shouldn't be able to get access to the management plane. And from the management plane, they shouldn't be able to get access and do things that are in the control plane. I'll give you some examples. This is another way of looking at the enterprise access model. We have our IT admin and break glass accounts. These are rarely used. These are the super accounts that are used to set up things, set up policies, set up your environment, do everything else. They shouldn't be used on a day-to-day basis. The IT admin, though, does get the ability to create and manage the workload identity admins. These are the ones that are operating in the control plane. The workload identity admins are the ones that allocate workload operators into the groups that have access to manage and look after the workloads. So you can see that what we've got is a multi-step process here. The workload operator, you're not using the same account to determine who has access and gets access to these workloads in terms of managing the workloads as those who are actually doing the management of the workloads. It separates the steps out that an attacker might need to go through in order to get to the workload plane where the business systems, the IP, the identity information and the other bits and pieces that they're really after is living. So the common usage for the accounts, the workload operators, the day-to-day operations, and also the users who are accessing those workloads are only coming in through their non-privileged interfaces, as well as the APIs for other apps talking to them. How do we translate that and show how the tier model fits into the enterprise access model? The domain admin, once again, privileged account is sitting outside it. We want that, have that as a break glass, but by and large, we're breaking up each of the workloads in each of the tiers to have an identity admin, somebody whose job it is to allocate people, accounts into the correct groups, into the correct OUs that have then got the ability to manage the workloads. Each of these are separated. And we're controlling these with the AD tools of OUs, group policies, and then using specific accounts. Each of the workload identity admins and the workload management accounts, even at the privileged level, should be tied back to an individual. All right. Rejigging that for the cloud. Once again, we've got control, management, and other accounts. We're separating things out so that we have those who are at the control level, those who are managing the identities are kept separate accounts from those who are managing the workloads. Azure AD is a flat space, therefore we can't use OUs and inherited policies from group policy to do that. You can only inherit basically from the subscription level down to resource groups to resources. So instead we're using multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and identity management for elevation of things. And then you can use Azure policy to control some other bits and pieces as well. But the same way for on-prem, privileged accounts, your global admin, as like your domain admin, is considered a break glass account. All right. Yes, and there should be separate accounts for managing Azure AD and the rest of Azure, if you can. So this is part of the security layers that you're putting on place. Every time you put on extra security layers on things, it does have an impact on productivity, and you'll find that for the privileged workloads in particular, that those accounts, using those accounts does have a bit of a productivity hit compared to the Wild West cowboy approach. The other thing with these privileged accounts is you'll find Azure AD Connect is used to synchronize between your on-prem AD and Azure AD. Do not synchronize the privileged accounts. Your domain admin and your other privileged accounts you might have in AD should never be replicated to Azure AD, and you shouldn't be creating privileged accounts in AD to synchronize up to Azure AD. All right. The only ones that should be synchronizing are essentially your user level accounts and perhaps those specialized security accounts. For Azure AD in particular, privileged access accounts don't have standing access. We use PIM to make sure they're time bound. If people need to do something privileged, they start a workflow. The workflow, once it's approved, puts them into the right group. It's just-in-time administration. Once they're finished, it drops them back out of the group. This stops attackers being able to grab hold of that account and use the privileges that would normally be used for that account outside of the normal working process. Finally, to finish up, just to summarize some of the other things that have been added. Now, I'm going to, these all fall back to show you this is the docs article for securing privileged access, including most of the things that have been talked about. It is public information. It was updated in December last year, and you can expect to have some more refinement and changes happening over the next few months. Let's go back to that one. Drop that. All right. Oops. Retirement of the enhanced security admin environment, or Red Forest. If you are running a Red Forest, more power to you. We've found that for most organizations it is too much overhead, too much admin overhead, too much trouble. People just can't keep it up. So as far as recommendations of a hardened forest, an admin forest, a Red Forest situation is concerned, that is now no longer a recommendation from Microsoft, except in particular edge cases, which are still documented in the article there. The goal is to shift things to using Azure AD instead of a separate admin forest. The AD tier model has been labeled legacy. As I said, don't read too much into that word. All that word really means is that it's not cloud. It doesn't belong in the cloud. It is still absolutely the preferred approach for your on-prem systems. There has been an expansion of security levels. As I said, from user to privilege, there's now the specialized security level in there. There's some more discussion around what specialized security means. And the enterprise access model itself, for cloud admin specific information at the same level as the tier model is operating, that's still being developed. I said you can expect to see more changes happening over the next few months, but the enterprise access model as a whole is where we're operating now. And we've just hit 5 o'clock. So I'm hoping that that has answered everybody's interest on what it means to secure privileged access, the most recent updates and changes from Microsoft, where to find them, and if you've got any other questions, then feel free, please, to reach out. My Twitter handle's been there in the bottom left-hand corner of all the slides as well, in case that helps. I'll hang on the line too after the recording stopped in case people have got other questions that they want to ask.
No, thanks. Good job on the 5 o'clock there. That's it. I'll probably end the recording and we can just hang out in the chat room.
Cool. And thanks everybody for attending.